Hi, this is Lynn Langett, and I'm here to do the Train the Trainer recording of the Houses Recipe. So you're going to start by importing GGQ 678, and then we are going to start on a line that we can see. So to do that, we are going to start on line 25. Can you read that out for me, please?
Move the tortoise the height of a house.
And what's the subject there?
Tortoise.
Okay, so I'm going to start by typing tortoise, and I'm going to complete that with a tab and a dot. And what's the verb?
Move.
Okay, so I'm going to say move, and in this case, I don't know what the height of a house is, so I'm going to just use the word height. I'm going to put in a variable, and I can't run that, of course, because I don't have that variable declared. So I'm going to go up to line 5, and if you can read line 5 for me, please.
The current height is 40.
Whenever you see the word current, that indicates a variable. So although we normally have you do one line and then run it, in this case you're going to need to do 2 lines. And then you're going to run it, and you're going to see that you move for that amount. So then you clean up the line by doing Control L, and the other line that's been correctly translated by doing Control L. Then we're going to read line 25.
Turn the tortoise 90 degrees to the right.
And there the subject is?
Tortoise.
And the thing that the tortoise is doing is what?
Turn.
And we need to say 90 degrees to the right, and then we're going to go ahead and run that. Now with the kids, you probably wouldn't do this next line yet, but because we have certain time limits for the video, we're going to actually go up to line 1. Read line 1 for me.
Make the tortoise move as fast as possible.
Okay, so we're going to do tortoise, and then here you want to remind the kids about getters and setters, which was taught in the first square recipe. They should remember set speed. This will just speed up our output. Again, it's really important when you're teaching that you do 1 line of English for 1 line of code, and then you run it. And then you clean up the line as soon as it's translated. So now we're going to go back down, and we're going to go to line 25. Can you read that out for me?
Move the tortoise 30 pixels.
And of course, this should be pretty quick for the kids to do at this point, but you want to enforce the discipline each time of running. And the reason is we're repeating on purpose so the kids get this kind of almost a reflex response. Read line 26 for me.
Turn the tortoise 90 degrees to the right.
Great. And as you can tell, when I'm doing this, I'm having the student read and then translate. It's really important that you have the students read rather than reading to them, because that's a way for them to be engaged and to keep them up to date with what you're doing. Read line 27, please.
Move the tortoise the height of a house.
Okay, and again, what we're doing here is we're reinforcing the use of our variable. Remind the kids that they shouldn't have to type the word height. They can just type the first 2 letters and then press tab to complete it. That not only is faster, but it helps them to spell it correctly. And then they're going to clean up the line right above it. So the next line that we need to read here is right below it. So read line 28, please.
Turn the tortoise 90 degrees to the left.
Okay, so now we're going to translate this. And this the kids might have a little bit of trouble with. Make sure to remind them to read the documentation, because they'll see in here how you do this using a negative number. Try not to tell them the answer, and encourage them to just search in documentation until they find it. Really, really important. It's one of the core skills that we're teaching. When we read the next line here, to line 29.
Move the tortoise 20 pixels.
Okay, that should be pretty easy for the kids to translate. So we're going to say move, and then we're going to go ahead and run that. And they've almost got their house done now, which is awesome. And now we're moving on to the last line of this particular section.
Turn the tortoise 90 degrees to the left.
And again, if you have more astute kids, you can remind them of one of our core tenets, which is that successful programmers are lazy, and they can just copy the previous line, but they still have to run it to make sure that it's working. And there we go. That looks really, really good. Now here's where you're introducing one of the core concepts that is part of this recipe, and that is the idea of subroutines. Now we do have these slides, and I'll pull up the slide here. You may also use the slide that I'm showing here on slide number 6 on variables, but more often than that you will probably use the slide on subroutines. The way we explain it is we talk about making a cake where you have frosting and you have layers. So you might have a list of all the ingredients in the frosting, and that would be the actual subroutine. But you don't actually make the frosting until up here where it says do stuff. That's the equivalent of make the frosting. And make sure you point out the parentheses as well. So this is going to be a hard concept, so you're going to need to guide the kids a little bit. So we're going to go into line 19 and read that out for me.
Recipe for draw house.
Okay, and remind them that you start with the word sub and you have a space, and then encourage them to copy and paste, and remind them that draw house can't have any spaces in between the name of the subroutine. And then have them take a look at the documentation and have them read the last line to you just to reinforce that they need to put an end sub. That is the most common error, one of the most common errors when you are working with this recipe. Now here's a key point of learning and the reason we teach it in this order. Ask the kids what you think is going to happen when you run the recipe, and they probably think that it's just going to run the way it is. Now, of course, when you run it, what's going to happen is nothing, because you've listed the ingredients, i.e. you've drawn the house, but you haven't said draw the house. So read line 5 for me.
Draw house. Recipe below.
Now again, this is a key concept. You want to encourage the kids to type a D and an R and then point out that we now have a telephone because you're calling this subroutine, and they can press tab and it adds the parentheses and then it runs. Okay, so very, very slow here. Make sure everybody stays up with you. Core concept, once they get it, have them delete the lines and then have them go ahead and use the format by right-clicking and ask them what happens. Remind them this is the same thing that happened on the if. Now you can go ahead and translate line 19 at this point. Read that out.
Change the color of the line the tortoise draws to light gray.
Okay, so tortoise, and this should be something familiar to them, set pen color, and you can use the colors object. I'm actually going to use red because it's going to show up better in the video. You should use light gray, obviously, when you're running it. There you go, and then we can get rid of that line. Okay, so now is when the fun comes in of this recipe. In addition to teaching about subs, the second thing we're teaching here is setting the value of variables. So read line 6 for me.
The current height is 120.
So of course we're going to use the height variable, encourage them not to type it, and then we're going to have to do these lines in pairs. Read line 8 for me.
Draw house.
Okay, so then again, encourage them to just type the first 2 letters and press tab, because that will autocomplete with the parentheses, which is again a really common error when the kids are running this recipe. And then have them run it and ask them to tell you what happened. What happened was the value of the height changed, of course, and gave you different height on your houses. So it should be pretty easy for the kids to continue on. Read line 9 for me.
The current height is 90.
Okay, so again, we're using the height variable, setting the value to 90, and of course we have to do this in pairs. Read line 10.
Draw house. Recipe below.
Okay, and we're using this syntax to remind kids that they've written the recipe down below, and this will give us 3. And then we just get rid of the lines, and we're up to the very last one here. So read line 10, please.
The current height is 20.
Okay, so now the kids are getting the hang of it and having lots and lots of fun. They're seeing the value of a variable, and we'll just complete this with the draw house, and then we'll run it. And of course, we're getting to the point where we're going to run off the screen. So just to make this visually more pleasing, and also to introduce yet another new concept, we have line 2. Can you read that out for me?
Have the tortoise start at 200 pixels in on the x-axis.
Of course, the subject here is tortoise. Now, what the kids are going to get confused on is probably start point, have start, because they're going to look for a direct translation of the verb. In the first couple recipes, we've been very, very careful to have most of the English nearly translate directly, so the kids have a high sense of, or high possibility of just directly discovering the answers. However, as we as professional programmers well know, that is not always the case. The APIs are not always so English-like. So we're slowly introducing the concept of more complex APIs and having to read the documentation. So a great teaching tip here, if the kids are stuck, is to say, what do you need to tell the tortoise to do so that you can translate, have the tortoise start at 200 pixels on the x-axis, so the tortoise can do that. And notice I've stopped typing on TOR, and on the right side here we have a list of all the things we can tell the tortoise to do. So what do you think we can tell the tortoise to do to translate this?
Set x.
Great. So again, if kids are stuck, remind them about getters and setters, and have them just look at the S because they're changing a value, so look in a setter, and then of course have them look at the documentation. They will commonly forget to put in the 200 pixel value because they'll get excited when they find it, and then we'll go ahead and we'll run it. And this is the core houses recipe. So we just need to clean this up, and then have the kids save it before you go on to variations.